Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming and braving seems to be our daily thunderstorm. A brief word about some upcoming events. My name is Will Pomerantz. I'm Deputy Director here at the Kennan Institute. A few words about some upcoming events. Tomorrow, from 3:30 to 5, we will have Mark Berenson here. Mark currently is a Title VIII research scholar. He's also a senior lecturer at the Russia Institute at King's College London, and he will be talking about citizens, subjects, and slackers, Polish, Russian, and Ukrainian attitudes towards paying taxes. That's a long title and a big topic, and unfortunately we'll have Ken Yalowitz here to serve as our discussant. On Tuesday, July 22nd, from 10 a.m. to 12, in the 6th floor auditorium, we will have a panel discussion on the impact of Ukraine in the neighborhood. And the speakers include John Herbst, Eric Rubin, Thomas DeWall, and again, our own Ken Yalowitz. So we look forward to seeing you at those upcoming events. Today, it is our great pleasure to have Yaroslav Pilinsky here. Yaroslav is the office director of the Kennan Institute in Kiev. He has a PhD in philology from the Institute of Ethnology, Folklore, and Art Studies at the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. He has previously been a professor of Ukrainian literature at Kiev State Pedagogical University and at Kiev State Conservatory. He has previously served as director of the research department of the Philip Orlik Institute for Democracy, and he was also a research fellow and has over 60 publications in academic and professional journals, as well as numerous other publications. And today, Yaroslav is going to be talking about a new agenda for a new Ukraine, political, security, and social dimensions. And Yaroslav, great pleasure to welcome you back, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Will. And thank you to reminding me my biography, because many of things has happened so many years ago that I really don't remember that it was held in my life. But anyway, I am now here trying to speak about new agenda for new Ukraine, and maybe more concentrated on new governance. This problem is very important for Ukraine from many points of view. But before speaking about this, I want to tell you that from our prospect now in Ukraine, we understand how tough is situation in general. And we really need support and aid from outside. But from another hand, and I think it is much better visible here in the United States or in Europe, we understand that it is very difficult to sympathize somebody, to help somebody in reforms economically if country is invisible. So one of the main problems for Ukraine to be more and more visible. Just few examples. Everybody knows, who know about Ukraine, that the nuclear missiles in the Soviet Union were placed in Ukraine, and many years ago removed. But almost nobody, or only specialists, know that most of these missiles were built in Ukraine. Everybody knows just a hit of American music from the 20th century. Summertime is the best of the seasons. But nobody knows, and somebody knows that this is Gershwin, but nobody knows that this is Ukrainian folk song. The sun is coming or going around our windows, which was possessed by Gershwin from the Koshitz Chor in New York in the beginning of 20s. So it is a long list, which means that we know that in some sense our input in the world development was not so small. But because of this invisibility, it's very difficult to speak about Ukraine now. And one of the biggest problems for Ukraine is a problem of communication with the world and communication through media and through different sources of information. coming back to the situation in Ukraine, I want to say that to our mind, one of the main problems of Ukraine, which is related to corruption, to lack of responsibility, is a problem of governance. In fact, after the decay of the Soviet Union, Ukraine finds itself in a very interesting position. It finds itself among friends. And in some sense, maybe this is help us to explain why so weak was Ukrainian reaction at the last events, let us say, in such way. Because at the West we have Poles and Slovaks and Hungarians who belong to the Western Europe and were not our enemies at all. To the East we have brother nations of the former Soviet Union like Belarusians and Russians. And maybe these, to some extent, help us to understand why so weak was Ukrainian state. Because in fact, Ukrainians don't need no strong army, no strong security, no strong some military forces or fleet. In some sense, maybe this sounds a bit strange, but this is a very interesting example of, so Ukraine come beyond the history in some sense. Ukraine live in a peaceful 21st century, just in 20th century. And from this point of view, of course, we have definitely a weak state, because we don't need a strong state for many reasons. And from this point of view, our people were, maybe this is not good to say that silly, but they were naive and not understand how to govern this big territory which belonged to them and which could be much more prosperous than they even can imagine. And now I want to say that, from another hand, the history of Ukraine has a very long and good records on governance on a local level. If we come back to our history, we will see that so-called local governance, which was called as a Magdeburg law, was introduced in Ukrainian cities in the beginning of the 14th century, from the western Ukraine to the middle of the 17th century, in the far east of Ukraine, in city of Glukhiv. This is almost 300 kilometers to the east of from Kiev. And in some sense, in fact, the border of Ukraine and the border of Europe in this sense is just and the territory which everybody can see at the maps. So this is the territory of Sumy and Kharkiv regions, where the Magdeburg law was used in the local governance. But the problem is that Ukrainians have almost never have their central government. And this is an all-powerful central government. And if we can say that we have a good tradition of local governance, we have not or almost no tradition of central governance. And this is a big problem. I should also mention that even at the village level, Ukrainians have elected their priests and their teachers for their villages. So in fact, it was a small government of a small village. So from this point of view, even at the village level, Ukrainians have a good governance and which help them to go through the different situations in the life of this country in its long history. So coming now to the modern times, I should say that maybe this is a best time to begin to think about what country Ukrainians want to have and want to build, and how to rule this country. What type of the country? I have come back to the history and say that if we look at the history of the United States, as far as I know, it was almost 40 years of discussion among Americans in different states before the revolution. Discussion precisely about what type of country they want to have. And maybe that's why it was maybe not so quickly and smoothly, but anyway, the founders established the country that is still is so successful. Of course, I guess in 21st century, Ukrainians don't need another 20 years to think through what really country they want to have. But probably this is a real time to think about this, especially because there is a lot of very successful examples around. I also want to mention that one of the part of this, let's be honest, bad governance in Ukraine is because the elite of Ukraine don't think a lot about this. They mostly use their power during the last 23 years just to satisfy their own interests. When we look at the work of Ukrainian parliament during the last 23 years, we can see that they write and rewrite different laws for different business groups and for different business interests. But history knows very good examples when, for instance, in Turkey, Kemal Atatürk, their president, first president and founder of Turkish state, has overnight introduced main laws for Turkey. And country began to live according to these laws. So probably this is time for Ukraine also think about maybe first make a decision what country or what type of the country they want to have, Swedish liberal social democracy or liberal democracy like in the United States, and introduce this legislation. I know this is very easy in theory, but before this decision will be made by the Ukrainian government or Ukrainian society, it is impossible to say or to answer on the question of our former president Kuchma. Tell me please what country we want me to build, and I will build you this country. So we still live under this question and don't know what country we plan to build. But now we have a good news from the last couple of weeks, and this good news about the beginning of a kind of a discussion in Ukraine, how to establish, in fact, or re-establish this state. And I should say that it is very important that in the government and in the parliament begin to speak about the reform of local governance. I'm not sure that our officials or all our officials who speak about local governance understand correctly what it means and know the very successful foreign experience. And here I want to mention, for instance, the experience of Italy, which have a very successful reform of local governance in the middle of 70s, which was studied by American and European scholars after 20 years in the middle of 90s and reported a very successful results, at least in the half of the districts of Italy. But I am completely sure that this is a time to begin the discussion in Ukraine what to do with this. Another very good examples of local governance are not far from Ukraine. One is in Poland and another is in Israel. And all are in some sense applicable, both are in some sense applicable to Ukraine, because from one hand, Polish experience is good for us because we are close, we are neighbors, we have almost very similar culture and heritage, and it is easy to share this experience from Poland to Ukraine. The Israeli experience is also important for us, especially now, when our country is in a great threat and part of our regions really need their experience in resilience and sustainability because they are really under war threat. So coming back to this story, I want to say that probably Ukraine need a reform of local governance, first of all, because without reform of local governance and without giving the local governments and local communities real rights to build their life in the way they want to build, it will be impossible to make Ukraine a really democratic state. Because only local communities, and this experience we can use from any successful country in the world, like United States, Poland, Italy, Israel, and others, built their state beginning from the top, from the down to top. The last example, our President Poroshenko, which I don't want to criticize him just now because he is just only few months in his presidency, but this is just an example. He proposed to Parliament to adopt a new constitution, and this constitution just make his power more and more, and the power of local communities less, and local governments at the regional and district level. Maybe this is not just a bad will. This is a logic of central power. But from another hand, central power in Ukraine should understand that they will never build a strong country if they will not establish a strong bottom for the state. And this strong platform for the state are just local communities which grow up in a democratic way from bottom to the up. So how to do this reform? In our office in the Kennan Institute in Ukraine, we have several seminars speaking and discussing this issue with our colleagues, with our scholars who have been in the Kennan Institute during the last couple of years. And we understand that this is really impossible to build successful local communities if political monopoly will still exist at the local level. The problem is that at the state level, we really have a couple of political parties. But unfortunately, the bad habit of Ukraine is that at the local level, this is almost in all parts of Ukraine a party monopolism. If it is a Western Ukraine, it could be a district or region of Batkivshchina, or now Udar, or Svoboda, and no other party has no good representation in this district. And if this will not be changed, it will be impossible to speak about the good changes in the local governance in Ukraine. From another very big problem and very big threat for Ukraine is the monopoly of the state in all issues. If this monopoly will not be liquidated in the nearest future, it will mean that it will be also very difficult to govern at the local and district level on this territory. And what is even worse than monopoly of the power is a monopoly of property. The land in Ukraine belongs to the state. And if it belongs to the state, the local communities can use it in a proper way for their prosperity. So they can't take money from the bank, they can't build something at this place without the permit of the central state government. And even if we speak about the bureaucratic side of this problem, we can see that it will take not weeks, not months, but years to have a permit from the central government in Kyiv to build something or to create some property in a local community, even 20 kilometers far from Kyiv, not to speak about 200 and so on. We also need, our local communities also need to change and to destroy the monopoly of finances. The problem is that all taxation come to the central government. And because of this, local communities has no possibilities to govern their territory in a proper way. And the last threat is the monopoly of administration. The problem is that all these state servants or servants in this local community are state servants and belong to the hierarchy of the state governance. So they have no interest to communicate with local people because they are not depend on these people. And that's why it is very difficult to speak about development of this region in such situation. So we hope that in the nearest future, when probably a new parliament will be elected in this autumn, we will have enough political will in our government and in a presidential administration to begin this administrative reform and give the power to local governments. It means that it should be prepared and it will take a long time, but anyway, it is necessary to think about the preparation of experts and support of society and to train specialists to deal with all the problems which come down to the local communities from the central government. One of the main problems of Ukraine as the countries of the former Soviet Union as totalitarian or authoritarian countries is the concentration of power around the working place. So it means that all the power belong in these cities to the factory or to the central government or to the but not to the municipality. And without deconcentration of this and reorientation of this power on the local communities, it will be very difficult to speak about reforms. It is also important to think about the education in this case, because most of the people are educated in some kind of a centralized way, and they don't understand that only the concentration of education will help them to build community colleges which will be useful at the local level, and the graduates from these local colleges will find jobs and this community, but not will leave it for big cities and even for abroad. So if Ukraine want to move forward in, so to say, building democracy, it need to make such reforms and adopt almost maybe 10, maybe more laws which will help to run this process in the nearest future. I just only mentioned such laws like about self-governance, about the local administration, about election to a local administration, because this is very sophisticated question and countries who make such reform has also made mistakes. For instance, they have elected the local governance and they elected the governance of the regional level. And the governance on the regional level lose the contact with the local communities. And it means that if they lose the contact, they lose not only the support of local people, but they also lose the understanding of the needs of local people. I also want to mention that the critical point of changes in Ukraine are changes of the taxation and finances. Without changes of the distribution of taxes, it is impossible to collect money for local government and to give them possibility to use this money in a proper way and to control this money in a proper way. Because until now, only 2% of money that are used at the level of the village come from the local level. The rest of the money come from the central budget. So the local people, in fact, are not interested to develop their territory because they have no access to the money that are gathered at this place. I have a very interesting experience to study how it's worked in other countries, and I should say that, you know, that I think that this works also in the United States, that in many countries, local governments get taxation from the local property. And it's work, because if you have a field with potatoes, you have one taxation. And if you have a Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, just at this square meters, you have completely another taxation. And it helped to develop the local community very much. And such good experience exists in the world, and Ukraine just should use this experience and change its local taxation, the taxation of the local communities, because without these changes, without property, we will never move forward, not only economically, but also in a proper way to develop our democracy. At the end of this short story, I want to say that, of course, other changes of our life are very critical, and if they will not be, it will not be done in the nearest future, nothing will happen in a proper direction. So we definitely need new court, new procuracy, the reform of police, the reform of taxation, and of course the reform of control of all these things. And these reforms are really critical. And these reforms should be the very important sign for all the society and for Western investors how President Poroshenko and new Ukrainian government reform the country. Do they really build a new successful Ukraine, or they just do what was done during the time of our presidency of Kuchma, Yushchenko, and Yanukovych? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yaroslav. It's a very interesting series of arguments and understanding of the current situation in Ukraine. I guess my question is, you talk about the role of a weak state and the need to create local government. Is that the same thing as meaning creating a federal state in Ukraine? In federalism, you kind of would think party would go to the regions and then to the local government. But are you talking about Ukraine remaining what is referred to as a unitary state, a single state, with strong local government? Or are you talking about a shift more to a federal Ukrainian state where power gets transferred to the regions and then further down to local government?
I think that now it is not time to speak about the federalization of Ukraine, because in some sense, looking at the linguistic, ethnic, and other maps of Ukraine, we can say that Ukraine is more or less unified country, because all these differences that are claimed around are not so big on the territory of Ukraine, and there is no, so to say, tradition of federalization, of existing of different parts of Ukraine as a federal unities. I think that maybe this is a question for the future. So I don't want to say that never and it's impossible. But I want to say that before we speak about federalization of federal units on the territory of Ukraine, we should speak about local communities which are powerful enough and aware enough of their power to think about how they want to arrange their life on their territory. Because only in this case, people will understand what they want and how they want to govern their larger homeland, so to say, and what relationship they want to have with the central government. In other case, it should be just an imitation of reform that we have during the last 23 years, only in the interests of the oligarchs or bureaucrats. From another hand, I should say that I have, so to say, my personal experience of the attempts to arrange autonomy in Transcarpathia. Many years ago, in the beginning of 90s, I just studied the situation in Transcarpathia, and there were some, so to say, talks about this. And the main, as far as I understand from the talks with local people and local oligarchs and bureaucrats, the main intention of these people was that after the decay of the Soviet Union, they think that if they will have autonomous republic of Transcarpathia, they will have more, so to say, possibilities or more rights to cut the trees in Carpathian mountains, in a simple words, and to sell them in Hungary. But then, when they understand that they don't need autonomous government in Uzhgorod, and they can cut successfully these trees without autonomy, they forget about this. Because from another hand, if you have a local government in small district or federal power, you have these responsibilities. And these people never want to have these responsibilities on this territory. They just want to cut trees and sell them in Hungary. And they did this successfully. So this is sophisticated question. And if you speak about the so-called local bourgeoisie and elite, they don't need it now in Ukraine. If you speak about, so to say, local people, they don't aware what it is. They don't know what it is. And first, when we begin seriously speak about some kind of federalization of Ukraine, we should be sure that people understand what about we are speaking. Because we just can shift corrupted power from Kiev to Odessa and make some kind of a South Ukrainian territory, or call it, I don't know how. Because a couple of months ago it was possible to say Novorossiya as a historical name of this territory in 19th century, but now it is impossible to use because it is poisoned by other situation and other people. But I am not sure that people in Odessa region really aware what they win and what they lose. What probably maybe win or lose local, so to say, political elite, we don't know. But I'm not sure that even they understand this, because this is a very short-minded people, and they are not oriented on the governance of the region. They are oriented on the making money. And this is another problem of Ukraine, the total consumerization of everything. This is very bad and very important. And that's why we begin to speak about local governance, because local people better understand why and how and for what purpose to spend money. Because in other case, if you're rich, you can be a top of the district police, you can be a procuracy guy, you can be a judge of the oblast. You just pay and buy. And it was in Kuchma times, and it's flourish in Yanukovych times, when everything was for sale. And it's good for people who can do this, who can buy this, but this is very bad for the state and for the rest of the population.
open the floor for questions here. Thomas, and then over here. We'll get a microphone to you.
My name's Thomas Grindley. I can't resist asking a provocative question. How does it come that Ukraine has kept its Kennan Institute open, but Russia has not?
Well, I think I will take
You will take this
take
stage.
charge of a very provocative question. It's due to a variety of questions of internal resources, and it was also due to questions about ability to continue to operate inside Russia as well. So a variety of factors went into a very difficult decision. It is our intention to remain engaged in Russia, to find new means by which to remain engaged in Russia, we have a established alumni network, and strong contacts, and we will continue to find ways to remain engaged in Russia. But we regretfully had to make a decision in terms of available resources and in light of current political situations and our ability to operate in Russia as to whether we could maintain our Moscow office. So it involved a variety of factors. It was a very difficult decision, but I want to emphasize that it isn't necessarily a decision not to be engaged in Russia. We have every intention to remain engaged in Russia, and we will continue to find new partners and work with our alumni in Russia to continue the Kennan Institute and our programming in Russia. Over here.
Good afternoon, Rob Tim from the National Defense University. You pointed out in your opening remarks that one of the reasons why Ukraine's had this weak development of institutions and governance has been the lack of a threat from many of its neighbors at its birth. And now they have a threat.
Yes.
So the question really is, that threat now creates both centrifugal and centripetal forces at the same time amongst both the population and the elites. And I was wondering what your assessment is of which of those is ascendant. In order to achieve, the goals that the public had at the Maidan is going to require a very significant trade-off. And a lot of the elites who've done very, very well under the existing system are going to have to either, to some extent willingly, give up some of those gains in order to get something else, which is a functioning state that can provide them the security that they want. On the other hand, there might be a better deal in the offering for some of them, and I was wondering what you think about the tension between those two things.
First of all, I want to say that I think that neither elites, neither population don't feel themselves quite well before the Maidan. I come back to my own experience. I have a talk with our prominent sociologist just a year ago, or maybe in September. And they told me that nothing will happen in Ukraine during the next year. But in 2 months, everything happened. Why this happened? It is a long story, but I will be as short as possible. I want to say that, coming back to John Locke, who wrote in his book, everybody knows this quotation, that this word that the people are prepared to, so to say, suffer as long as possible, but then overnight they uprise, and sometimes it is absolutely unclear why. In case of Ukraine, it is, for me, it's very clear. 2 reasons. First, the corruption exhausted country so much that there was no resources in the country at all. And if Yanukovych not, so to say, do what he do, the country fall apart economically in couple of months. I have a lot of evidences from different sides, from government, from local governments, that there was no money. And in simple words, he come to European Union to sign this agreement with words, give us money immediately. And because they say, listen, this is another order, it should be done in another way, he have no choice to come back and to go to Putin and take this $3 billion. Because without this $1 billion, the catastrophe will come next week. And it was absolutely clear, because they take all the money from the budget. So nobody was happy. From another hand, I should say that very slowly, but Ukrainian population moved forward to European Union with the idea that we want to be Europeans. We want to live in European Union. But it should not be misunderstood. It doesn't mean that overnight we want to be Europeans. It means for the most of Ukrainians, and I am absolutely sure in this, that people think that when Yanukovych signed this agreement, the corruption will slowly fall down, it will be more better judges, it will be less taxation or hidden taxation or racket, state racket. So people just think that situation begin to develop in another direction, very slowly. Nobody wants revolution, trust me. But even when he returned from the Vilnius and go to Putin and takes this money, people didn't want to make a revolution. And the protests at Maidan slowly go down. But it was a big mistake made by not by Yanukovych personally, but by his people around him, that from one hand don't understand Ukraine and Ukrainian people and scare the Maidan in general and prepare themselves to the elections of the 2015. And one of the main goals was to win the elections 2015 for Yanukovych, and they also want to scare people to death, that in case of the misuse of the whatever these elections in 2015, nobody comes at the streets, because people will understand that police will, let's say, kill them. So it was a demonstration of power, but they lose the time, they use the not proper moment, and they misuse the forces. And they underestimated the Ukrainians. So if they don't beat this student, I'm absolutely sure, and we discussed this with different experts many times, all the protests will slow down, and we will have the next, so to say, Maidan, maybe somewhere in the spring, when part of the Putin's money were used and another part will be stolen. But because they were done in the way it was done, we have in fact the revolution. Because people momentarily, after this beating of the students, understand that there is no peaceful solution, that government will kill us, in a simple word. So we should do something with this. And people come to the streets. And not only in Kiev, as it was in 2004, but in other cities of the central and western Ukraine. And even in southern and eastern Ukraine, we have so-called Euro Maidans. But this was not Euro. This was Maidans against corruption, against Yanukovych, against this life that we have during the last maybe 23 years. So people grow up to understanding that they should change everything, that they don't want to live in such state. And this is a big difference from the uprising in the 2004. Because in this time, people were more paternalistic. They think that we will elect him, Yushchenko in this case, and he will change everything. Now people understand that they, only themselves can change something. So from this point of view, I'm sorry, but I'm not agree with you speaking about the out-of-centric movement. Of course, we have, in some sense, very specific reaction on the situation in Kiev, on changes in Kiev in the eastern regions of Ukraine, especially in Donetsk region. But this is not, so to say, out-of-centric movement. This is a very specific situation, and it is a very long story how to explain why people in the Donetsk region, in fact, are priced. Because it's very interesting that sometimes what you speak about other people come to you. So they speak a lot about and scare of the right sector, but in fact they get the right sector in reality on their streets under the other name. So people with guns, with no order, who just kill and rob other people, which not definitely happen in Kiev. So it come to a leave, and because in general, in reality, the civic society in this region is very weak, they can't resist. And of course, they get a great aid from our neighbors. Because you can't go in a supermarket and to buy a tank, or to buy a missile, or whatever, which happens in the Donetsk region. I just only want to mention one very interesting indicator. If you look at the small businesses, you will see that we have, let's say, maybe I am wrong in figures, but I am correct in general. We have, let's say, 4 small entrepreneurs in Lviv region on the 1,000 population, and only 1 in Donetsk. And this is very important indicator if we know what about we are speaking.
In the back here?
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Yuri Akusha, Kimardis Consulting. I have a question about your decentralization story, because it sounds a little bit simplified, I'm sorry. Taxes will continue to be generated in big cities like Kiev, Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk. They're not going to be generated in villages. If you think about property tax as a solution, many countries, including this country, can tell you it is not a solution, because this is how you cement inequalities. Property valuations in Luhansk will continue to be probably 10 or 5% of Odessa. Moreover, there will be always a demand for large subsidies for the foreseeable future for the coal industry, for example, especially under energy blockade from Russia. So how do you see this decentralization really working, and whether it is really a panacea or some kind of a serious solution for many problems Ukraine is facing? And the second related question, this idea that somehow Ukraine lacks good laws and that will solve the problem is kind of not credible anymore. I can tell you that small business tax legislation in Ukraine is probably among the best in the world. But it is not followed, it is not implemented, it is completely disregarded by both taxpayers and by tax authorities and by the police. So how you solve that problem? You know, it's not only about better laws, it's about probably better institutional arrangements for those laws to be followed, right? Thank you.
So elect me as a president of Ukraine, and I will show you how I will solve this problem. But coming back to your questions. So first of all, I think that, of course, there is no simple solutions for problems that you mentioned. But coming to the last question, good legislation in this part, let us say, and bad legislation in this part ruin everything. Just an example. I don't know how it is now, but in the autumn in Ukraine there was legal taxation, so to say, and illegal taxation. And all people who gain money pay in some special funds, special money, and this money were concentrated in the hands of the party of region. And definitely this ruined all the businesses. I know evidences from different sources, beginning from the dentists who pay special hidden taxation. And if they not pay, they were fired. So, of course, you can show very nice legislation and very nice local tax office, and they will tell you a lot of good stories about how they collect money and how they use money. But when you come to the reality, you will see this hidden taxation in all the spheres of Ukrainian economy. So if we liquidate this hidden taxation, it will work. I think better. Maybe not very good, but better than it was even in these times, let's say a half a year ago. Coming back to the local governance and taxation, of course, there is no ideal stories, but we have a very good examples from different territories that if taxation is not gathered at this place and used only by central government to cover their own needs, but at least part of this money come back to this territory or not leave this territory and used by local people, it's work. Of course, Odessa now can collect more money as a seaport than Luhansk, but I'm not sure that in this case you are correct. Luhansk has a lot of enterprises, and military enterprises, and they also collect a lot of money. But this money go out from this region. And Odessa money also go out from the Odessa region to the offshore and to the central government and to the construction of Yanukovych residence houses around Kiev and in Carpathian Mountains. So we can't change something and wait for a good results. We should change all the system, and we definitely should change our minds. And I have very interesting experience to talk with local small governments, local governments in different regions. Last time we have a very interesting talk in the Chernihiv region. They have no money. They have a lot of ideas, but they can't buy just a small machine to work with the wood because they have no money. They have a lot of wood. They don't need gas. They just need, so to say, a legislation that permit them to collect money from the local people and do this and to begin the development of their region. They have no possibilities to do this. And because administratively their government has no rights, because this is subordinated to the central regional government or oblast government, they also have no possibility to change this situation. So we should change a lot of things before we have at least the prospect of a good results, not a good results yet.
Right here.
Mitchell Pullman.
It's on, yeah. It's on.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Couldn't hear. Actually, I was in Chernihiv working for the OSCE as an elections observer, and that's where I was based, and for all of Chernihiv Oblast. So I really only, recently have, experience with Chernihiv, but I wanted to go back to what you were saying about local government and responsiveness. When we were there, local government was sort of peripheral to our work, but I couldn't help but notice that the local government in the city at least seemed to be very actively soliciting requests and having conversations with local citizens and meetings and even going to apartment buildings, some of the deputy mayors to talk to citizens about their concerns. And they were making a big show also of unveiling new ambulances. And of course, it was elections time, but these were, after all, presidential elections. And, there may have, undoubtedly, there was some connection. But it certainly seemed to me that there is a growing notion, at least there was in Chernihiv, that local government does need to be responsive to citizens and does need to solicit input. And there's quite a bit done online as well in that regards, as I understand. So if you could comment on that, thanks.
Yeah, I should say that you have been at the last elections, you mean, at the presidential. So I should say that from my experience, even bureaucrats were tired with regime of Yanukovych, because all were included in a machine of making money. But they are local people, they live in this place, and they understand that in fact they ruin the economy and the life at their place where they live. So that's why maybe they were so active last 2 months ago in Chernihiv region, because they also want changes. They understand that they should do something in a different way than it was last 4 years. So this is my understanding. Because we can't say that all our bureaucrats are only just bad and not very reliable people, and that they just don't want to do something for their region.
Karina. Got a microphone right here.
Karina Karastelina, George Mason University. I also was a little bit surprised by some simplification of idea of state, because then you connect big state with just security and threat. You really deny all other functions of state, including providing social security, education, and so on. And so what do you think, like there are two questions interconnected with it. First, what do you think are the most important functions of state which should be developed right now by the new government? And my second question is exactly how government should deal with what's going on now in eastern Ukraine. I do not want to specifically define what's going on, because depending how you define what's going on there, you develop different strategies. So how you assess current position of a Ukrainian government regarding eastern Ukrainian situation? What do you think should be done? What should be changed? Or if you support it, I want to see what your position about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your two questions. My answer for your last question will be very simple. We should stop the war. First of all, we should stop the war with Russia, because let's be honest, this is a local war in the east of Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia. So after that, it will be possible to speak about the situation in the eastern Ukraine and think what should be done here. And it could be a lot of different scenarios. Second, if we speak about the simplification of the idea of the state, I am completely agree with you that I am simplify this, but we have not time to discuss this in a details. But coming back to some of my statements, I should stress once again that unfortunately in Ukraine, the idea of liberal democracy was understood in a wrong way, and everything was to sell. To be as simple as possible, I should say that teachers don't teach pupils in the school. They gain money. Doctors don't give a medical care. They gain money, and so on. Of course, this is also simplification, but this is unfortunately true. I live in this country, and I want to be as honest as possible. So people should come back to the understanding that some things in the country are to sell, and some things or some functions are not to sell. And after that, it will be easier to speak about the medical care, the schools, the security issues, and other functions of the state. Now we just be at the beginning of this process. Thank you.
Well, we've run out of time, so we're going to bring our conversation to an end. But I'd like to thank Yaroslav for his comments and speech, and thank you very much for your questions. And we look forward to seeing you at future Kennan Institute events. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
We are still engaged.
Right, no, I understand that.
Has it been done?
Good, good.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, so, but are you in the office at the?
Yes, I'm in the office in Kiev.
Yeah, I will. I'll be in touch. Thank you so much, and I'll send you a link. Thank you.
Just want to introduce myself.
Thank you.
I may be going to my son to the
Okay.
institution, so I hope to get together.
Okay, I will open. Yeah, I will stay here for 2 days more.
No problem. No problem. Actually able to get.
Welcome to Washington.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
I meant to come to this, I just got too busy.
Yeah.
But I hope we can visit
Yeah.
a little bit right now.
Yeah, thank
Okay?
you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Talk to your public first.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll bring him up.
Okay,
if you
good.
like, Yeah.
Thank you.
Good.
Hi, Will.
Hi, Jane. How you doing?
Good.
Good. Yes, we had this question. I'd like to ask a question. Still have the key of all this. No, I don't.
Question of you, or?
Question to Yaroslav, which I know.
Okay, we're gonna talk about what you said. Hi. Hey, Matt, yeah.
Nice to meet you. Great. Great. Thanks so much for your question. Good. Glad you were able to make it. Yeah, no, I think there was lots of very good questions. So I was very pleased that we pushed them in various directions. Yeah. You can't try to come. Hello, good to see you. This morning. Yes.
Do you have any other questions?
Okay, very good. Good to see you again. No, no. But, you can't answer Yuri's question. It's taken centuries to get to this point.
No, yeah, no, I would very much like to. Every time you,
Yeah.
every time you send away, you're like, oh, wait a minute, no, that's not me, what's happening.
Exactly.
That's what's so frustrating with so much public dialogue.
Anyway.
Yeah, so.
Thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, appreciate it.
До послезавтра, я послезавтра улетаю. Ну, если нужно будет поговорить,